For the last several weeks, Judy Woodruff has been digging into one of the most pressing issues facing our nation, deep divisions and distrust in some American communities. Tonight, she begins with a look back at our recent history and some of her own to try to better understand the nature of the divides we face and why this moment feels different. It's part of her new series, America at a Crossroads.
What do we want? Justice!
From fights over our rights
are not up for debate,
to defining who we are,
immigrants are welcome here.
what we believe, and what we teach our children. America is a house divided, and in many ways, it always has been.
Would you agree with Governor Carter, Dr. Krebs, that it's difficult to find qualified women?
I first came to Washington in 1977 to cover President Jimmy Carter, the former governor and peanut farmer I'd followed as a local news reporter in Georgia, where I spent my teenage years.
Judy.
Mr. President, how concerned are you that any...
I stayed here in Washington after Carter's landslide loss to Ronald Reagan in 1980. Through 6 more administrations, trying to better understand how our government works, what motivates our leaders, and how their decisions affect hundreds of millions of Americans across the country.
What happened today, Jim, was that a feud that has been simmering for weeks between Democrats and a group of conservative Republicans finally reached the boiling point. It all started
Over that time, I've watched partisan disagreements grow increasingly hostile.
Always delighted to yield to our distinguished speaker.
You deliberately stood in that well before an emptied house and challenged these people, and you challenged their Americanism. And it's the lowest thing that I've ever seen in my 32 years in Congress.
The reforms I'm proposing would not apply to those who are here illegally.
How stupid are our leaders? How stupid are these politicians?
You're looking for a fair process? You came to the wrong town at the wrong time, my friend.
That means Congress doesn't vote. Well, I'm glad to see you.
To the point that today there's an unwillingness to work with or often even talk to the other side to confront our shared challenges.
The debt debate in Washington heated up again, with the federal government set to hit its legal limit on borrowing in less than a week.
Rising distrust by the public in our big institutions, from the federal government and public health officials to journalists.
We are a nation that no longer has a free and fair press. Fake news is all you get.
We've watched partisan battles that undermine our ability to deal with real problems.
Much of the federal government was dark after Congress failed to agree on a stopgap funding bill.
Shocking acts of violence directed at our political leaders.
Giffords remains sedated 3 days after being shot in the head at point-blank range.
For at least 5 minutes, gunshots crackled across the Northern Virginia baseball field where Republican members of Congress were practicing.
U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul, was severely beaten with a hammer this morning.
And even attempts to subvert the machinery of democracy itself.
Chaos erupted at the U.S. Capitol today when pro-Trump demonstrators breached barricades and pushed their way inside.
Our current and former presidents of both parties acknowledge that something has changed over time.
But we didn't have many people playing on the fears of the American people. It's gotten too mean. It's gotten too personal, gotten too divisive.
So much of our politics has become a naked appeal to anger, fear, and resentment. That leaves us worried about our nation and our future together.
I've long wanted to better understand what's been happening, the forces driving us apart, and what can be done to overcome them. And that's what this series, America at a Crossroads, will be about. To begin, I want to ask the most basic questions. How divided are the American people? And how different are divisions today from what we've seen before?
Hello, Carol. How are you? Good to see you again. How are you?
To find out what survey data show, I visited the Pew Research Center, the nonpartisan think tank in downtown Washington that studied public opinion, demographics, and social issues for decades. Carol Doherty and Jocelyn Kiley design and analyze polls that Americans take online each year, revealing how people think and feel about a range of issues and how those feelings change over time.
The country is more divided, certainly along partisan lines than we've seen it. There have been divisions in the past along other lines, but this is a moment where the divisions are deeper than ever, and the intensity of dislike for the other side is probably deeper than ever as well.
I think it's fair to say on virtually every issue domain you can think about, the gap between Republicans and Democrats is bigger than it was 20 or 30 years ago. And so when I say that, I mean on, say, immigration, on abortion, on gun policy, on size of government. There have always been partisan gaps on these issues, but they're all wider than they used to be.
That's true not just of the American public, but of its leaders as well.
If you go back 30 years ago or so, there were a sizable share of Democrats in Congress who were more conservative than the most liberal Republican, and vice versa, a sizable share of Republicans who were more liberal than the most conservative Democrat. That hasn't been the case for nearly 20 years.
It also shows up in presidential approval ratings, which have fallen sharply since the 1950s for both parties.
It used to be that people would reserve their judgment about the new president. There'd be a lot of don't knows if you asked about a new president. And now people go to their partisan corners a lot more quickly in terms of evaluating a new president. So there's not as much of a honeymoon as we used to call it in the old days.
Is that also due to people feeling part of their party and their party is opposed, so therefore they are opposed?
Yeah, they are, exactly. I mean, so for Biden and Trump, it's very, people make their judgments very quickly, again, on the basis of their own partisanship.
And there's another trend that really worries Doherty and Kiley, the degree to which people from one side not only disagree with, but actively dislike those on the other.
It's not new that Republicans have an unfavorable view of the Democratic Party and vice versa. But these very unfavorables is what we're focused on here, and these are the sort of intensely negative. And you see that tripling just about between 1994 and 2022 on the Republican side, and a huge spike on the Democratic side as well. And so the shares of people who have this intense dislike for the opposing party has grown so much over the past 20 or 25 years.
We have asked for a while these questions about different traits. And you can see in this graphic that, for instance, 72% of Republicans say that Democrats are more dishonest than other Americans, and 64% of Democrats say the same about Republicans.
Carol, it is striking. I mean, you look at the numbers, immoral.
I know.
Just in 2016, 35% of Democrats thought Republicans were immoral. Today it's 63, and Republicans, it's gone from 47 to 72.
It is quite striking.
And Jocelyn, from a polling point of view, from a researcher, academic point of view, what's striking about that? I mean, we're talking, I don't know, 20, less than 30 years this has happened.
I think one way to think about this is that people have internalized partisan identity, maybe in a way that we didn't really see, say, 3 decades ago. So it's about issues, it's about emotions, and they kind of feed on each other, meaning as you see the other party further apart on issues, you're less likely to socialize with them. You're less likely to have them in your friend groups, and therefore maybe you're a little bit more likely to have negative stereotypes about them.
And that's what I wanted to ask you. Who's pushing this? Who's the instigator in all this? Is it Washington pushing the American public, or is it the American public pushing Washington?
Yes, it's both of those things.
Both.
It really is both, and you can think about the role of the media in this too.
Yes.
Yes.
Over this time period, we started to see more fragmentation of media, so people can tend to be more likely to get their news from places that show them the kind of news that they're interested in. The rise in cable news, the rise in social media, and so I think it would be very difficult to say this is top down or bottom up. It's a mix of both of those.
Add to that list a country that is rapidly changing demographically, extremely high levels of inequality, and very low trust in government, regardless of who's in power.
We talk about the ways the two partisan coalitions are growing more demographically distinct. They're also growing more distinct in terms of their issue positions and then also in terms of how they feel about one another. And each one of those contributes to each other.
Is this pattern just going to continue? Are we just going to see this get more and more intense over time, this partisan antipathy, this partisan hostility, leading to perhaps negative consequences for the country?
And this is what I'll be diving into over the next 2 years, trying to better understand the roots of our disagreements, where policy differences end, and where what you might call identity politics begin, and asking Americans from all walks of life how we can move forward towards solutions.
Well, decades ago, we disagreed over things like the role of government or the size of government or what we wanted the government to be doing. And with those types of divisions, we can find a compromise.
In my next report, I'll speak with political scientist Liliana Mason to try to understand how our identities and our politics became so intertwined and what that means for our challenges ahead.
What we're seeing today is that the divide is much more about our feelings about each other. We are angry at one another. Democrats and Republicans don't trust one another. And these types of feelings are not the kind of thing we can compromise with.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Judy Woodruff in Washington.
And we'll have Judy's second installment of America at a Crossroads next month, right here on the NewsHour.